Okay, welcome back. This is the final presentation of the day, and looking forward to hearing about how we can reimagine QA in the new normal. So that lovely term that we all hear about today. We've got, as I said, two for the price of one now. So we'll finish on a bang. We've got Pete Ellis from Redbox and Ted Mckenna from Tethr. And what I'll do now is hand over to Ted to commence the presentation. Enjoy.
Great. Well, thanks so much, and excited to be here along with my partner in crime, Pete Ellis. I will kick things off here, and what we plan to talk about is what we're calling reimagining QA in the new normal. So new normal, we find ourselves in this virtual setting, virtual summit. Obviously, we find ourselves still in this pandemic, and it's had a broad impact on customer care, customer support, customer service, and how they think about measuring quality assurance. And so what we want to talk today about is how organizations have grappled with this, how they've gone about measuring their frontline force, what types of things they're seeing, and really what are the type of new measurements that they're using as a way to identify real quality with respect to that experience with customers. So a quick agenda here for our webinar. I'm going to go through some introductions here in a moment. COVID-19 impact and the new normal, get into some parts about drawing and extracting insight from audio, and that's obviously Redbox's specialty, so Pete will speak to that. And then looking beyond traditional QA and into some of the measurement activity that Tethr does, and how to use a new measurement that we have called the Agent Impact Score to apply to quality assurance. And so with that, let me go to panelist introductions. I'll just take a very brief moment and then pass it over to Pete, who has a much cooler accent than I do. But Ted Mckenna, I'm one of the senior leaders here on the product side at Tethr. And so Tethr is a machine learning company. We analyze customer conversations and try to provide as much insight as possible out of those conversations for our customers. And let me pass it over to Pete.
Hi, everybody. So Pete Ellis says that I manage our product strategy and partnerships at Redbox. Been here about 5 years. It's definitely a long time since I've worn a shirt and tie on that photo.
Yeah, especially these days. It's a wonder to get shoes and socks on a given day, but maybe that's just me. No, but excited to be again with you, Pete. You know, Redbox has been a longtime partner of Tethr, and we're excited to kind of share some of our findings. Let's talk about the new normal and some of the things we're seeing. A couple months back, actually, sort of towards the beginning of the pandemic, we did a specific study on about 1 million different calls within that kind of 2 to 3 week window just after the World Health Organization labeled it a pandemic. And what we found in that very specific period was that customer effort doubled with new issues relating to that pandemic. So if you use some of our measurements to get after things like the amount of friction and the effort that's perceived by customers within those interactions, what you find is if you compare calls before the pandemic and into it about specific issues relating to things that they were dealing with because of COVID-19, you found those calls doubled the amount of difficulty they're feeling. So lots of customer anxiety happening in these conversations. You know, new types of anxieties and things that they're having to deal with at home, whether it's healthcare issues, travel issues, all sorts of things that pop up that relate to the types of things we're now dealing with and still dealing with that we weren't before. Now that's on the customer side. On the right side of the page, though, is about our agents in the front line and what they're dealing with. And remember, you know, back in March, this was a new thing. We send these people home, and now they're distributed all over the place without a manager in front of them or on the floor. And they're sort of left dealing with these now more anxious customers on their own. And so what you find, as you see on the right side of the page, is agents are left handling these very complex subjects and sometimes struggling. So we saw a massive increase in the amount of holds as they're dealing with new information and uncertain as to how to proceed. Lots more escalations as well. And this trickles down into language patterns and other things we see agents relying on almost as crutches in these moments, because they're out sort of left on the precipice on their own, dealing with these new issues. And so it just calls to question, you know, what's going on here, and why might we what might be need to do to help our agents in these situations. So if you root cause kind of what's going on, what are those things that are driving those difficulties? I mentioned some of these, but let's dig it a little bit further into them on the left-hand side with customers. So extreme anxiety with them, but sometimes it's because of policies and things that we have that maybe haven't been flexible. So it's not the agent's fault that that policy exists or that it hasn't changed, but nonetheless, the customer's on the phone talking to them about that situation. So they're frustrated with policies that haven't changed. Reps who aren't empowered to then resolve those issues. They didn't set the policy, they can't change it. They're not able to go and make that change to their bill or recognize their economic hardship in the moment. And so they end up using language that makes it worse. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then just general frustration with the service experience. So some of the things that were already difficult, digital experiences that weren't up to par, having to switch channels and go over to the customer care line to resolve issues that they were hoping to self-serve on, and so forth. Those things were already frustrating, but now you add anxiety into the bucket for the customer, and they come in with even more baggage that we're now left dealing with. Now, on the agent side, as you see on the right-hand side, they're sort of coping with not only just more higher anxiety calls, but more calls in general, just more issues that customers are having. And in fact, a lot of our customers are finding an increase in call volume, which kind of makes sense. And now, so we have more calls and more anxiety in those kind of this double bang issue for their teams, and they're now forced to resolve issues that and policies that haven't changed or haven't flexed. Now that might be different now. By October, hopefully, we've gone and reevaluated some of those policies, but nonetheless, they're still dealing with newfound issues, extended issues, stay-at-home issues, school issues, and so forth that parents and workers are having to deal with. And again, they don't have those people on the floor next to them that they can lean on, people they can go to, hang out with at lunch and get some extra scripting advice from, or the coach who's going to lean over their shoulder and give them a quick bit of advice. Now, couple all of that with QA methods that already were relatively outdated. So a high dependence on subjective measures for what is good and what is bad. Lots of sort of angst and anxiety in general with the process associated with QA methods. Agent concerns about selective bias in terms of the types of calls that they might look at to judge them, which leads to lots of appeals associated with that process, and it's just general sense that it's not a fair process at all. And so you're left sort of stepping back. You're left with this really difficult situation where customers are super anxious, agents are out there kind of handling it on their own, and then the mechanisms, the processes we typically depend on as a way to drive some of that performance has some foundational issues on its own. So just this real thicket of difficult situations that we're finding and sort of find ourselves in. And the question is, how do we go about fixing this? And so we're going to give you a sense for both what we see happening as you extract this insight from these calls that we're working through, and then also the measurements we might use as a way to judge our teams as to how are they actually driving better quality outcomes. Let me turn it to Pete here, and he's going to give you some detail on how Redbox thinks about high quality audio and how to think about extracting this insight from this high quality audio.
Thanks, Ted. So Ted set the scene here. Now let me take it back a stage and go through some basics. Before we start going into how can we analyze voice calls more effectively and get most accurate and performant analysis out of the conversations, there's some key basics that we need to go through. The same old adage of quality input drives quality output, and there's some key basics that we see constantly that customers are not taking account of and don't realize the impact of really doing proper voice analytics is dependent on some key elements. And there's 4 on the screen here. I'll just briefly go through them. So the first is stereo audio. You're analyzing a conversation between the agent and a customer. So you need to know who's saying what. There's no point guessing at that. So you need stereo input. People will say, well, you can upscale mono to stereo, and to a certain degree you can, but it's not accurate enough. And you want the best analysis, you need the best accuracy in terms of separating those two channels, who's speaking. So it's also quite then dependent on where you're capturing the audio and whether you're able to capture it stereo or not. So extremely important. Next piece, which people forget a lot, is really metadata. And there's one side of capturing audio, but metadata you capture about the call is just as important. So it's not just really who's calling and who are they calling, but their whole journey that they came in from the front office through to the back office, who they spoke to, what data was input at each of those stages, information about the customer. Staggeringly important if you're trying to properly analyze the context of the conversation. The next piece, which is the most impactful piece, which is compression. Now customers will compress audio in IP telephony for saving network bandwidth, or they'll compress in terms of storage of audio recordings. Completely valid reasons for doing both of those, but they have a staggering impact in terms of then the quality of analyzing those calls. Now, as a user, you'll find it hard pressed to tell the difference between a compressed and an uncompressed call on any of your high fidelity phones, like this one I've got in the background. But from a machine learning perspective, there's a massive difference. There's a lot of information lost when compression is implemented. So the most impactful piece. And last but not necessarily least is the timely access to this information. There's no point getting access to these conversations the next day when you're trying to affect customer experience or agent performance today, or if you want to influence the call as it's happening, and either influence the direction of the call or influence information that's passed to an agent. So timely access to this data is just as important. We go to the next slide, please, Ted. So from a Redbox perspective, our whole purpose in life to a certain degree is around how we capture high quality, considerable, rich metadata from virtually any telephony platform that you see on the left-hand side. That's our whole purpose. Now, we either provide that for compliance and regulatory reasons, or in this instance, we're extracting it really to drive value and insights from that data. So for us, it's all about high quality audio, high quality metadata, and feeding that into best of breed transcription engines for the sole purpose of getting to the right-hand side to the likes of Tethr that can really extract the proper meaning and insights to that data to drive specific business outcomes. And unless you've got the great input on the left side, your feedback from the right-hand side is just not good enough. It really isn't. And we pretty much don't advocate, unless you meet those 4 criteria on the first slide, we don't advocate moving to the right-hand side. And to put that into a bit more context, so in the next slide, please, Ted. This is just an example then of the key element in terms of that's affecting the quality of the output and the quality of the input into Tethr to a certain degree. What you're seeing here is a conversation on the left-hand side, which is then transcribed in 2 different formats on the right-hand side. And there's 2 ways of, largely most customers are coding IP telephony traffic using 2 different codecs, mainly G729 and G711. You'll find in most contact centers. 729 is highly compressed, 711 largely uncompressed. And as you can see here, the difference between the 2 in the terms of the context and understanding that's derived, even if you just forget the percentage at the bottom, there is a staggering difference between the 2. And the one on the far right-hand side is just not really achievable to derive enough context and meaning from that transcription. And it doesn't matter which transcription engine we use, they'll all do roughly similar. And this really, I suppose, highlights the reason why you really need to look at the quality of the audio. And we typically do a lot these days in terms of actually coming in just extracting the audio purely for analytics, even if there's alternate voice recording platforms in there, just because of the importance of this and really the rise of voice analytics. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to Ted to take you further through what Tethr can do in terms of the whole QA process. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And super important, right? Because we're in the business of trying to extract meaning from these situations, right? Difficult, very difficult to extract meaning in situations when it's not even getting you the right text that's representative of that exchange. And so much of that meaning is hidden in that exchange, that back and forth conversation happening between agent and customer. So let's talk about how we go about reimagining QA to reflect this new normal and be able to help our teams as much as possible. So we're going to break this into kind of 3 parts. First, we're going to understand what really does drive quality and make sure that we're pegging towards that on a day-to-day basis. Second, we're going to talk about automating and optimizing QA processes. And then finally, tying those to actual business outcomes that we all really care about. Let's start with that first one around what really drives quality. And so when you look at this page, what I want you to do is avert your eyes towards the right-hand side of the page, because that's really where we want to start. We want to start with the business outcomes that we really care about. When it comes to quality, that's what we all should be caring about. We should be pegging towards those types of things that matter with respect to business outcomes. Are we keeping our customers in the rates that we want? Are they happy enough to stay for long periods of time? Are they so happy that they're willing to buy more from us over time? And so when we think about loyalty, it's a very economic sense of loyalty. Are they buying more from us? Are they staying longer? And then, of course, there's a bottom line aspect to this: is how efficient are we in handling these situations? And what's our cost of service with respect to these situations? But it's all about those business outcomes. Now, as you move your way back towards the left side of the page, let's start with that book there it says Driven by Effort, The Effortless Experience. So a big set of research, decades long, that originally started at my old company called Corporate Executive Board, which is now part of Gartner. A couple of years ago, that organization partnered with my now company, Tethr, and taught the machine a set of research that was grounded in what are the biggest sources of disloyalty. So what they did is they did a whole entire study, a whole couple of different studies actually, about what types of things really drive a difference in a customer service contact center situation, right? So we're not talking about any situation in which we might want to make a customer loyal. We're talking specifically in those situations when something has gone wrong and they're contacting us to try to get service and resolution against that issue. What are the things we should go do? And now conventional wisdom is that in those situations, of course, like always, we look to delight our customers. We try to make them as happy as possible. Turns out the research tells us that's actually not the right way to do it. In these situations when something's already broken, the best way to go about doing it is actually to go towards the bottom end of the scale. Work towards disloyalty, to averting the disasters, those situations when customers are so upset that they're going to now go tell all their friends about how horrible that situation was. So you're avoiding negative word of mouth, and also if you're, of course, avoiding churn itself, because when those bad situations happen, they're far more likely to leave. And of course, that also drives cost for us too, because in those really bad situations, those are the customers that are calling us back, not once, not twice, not 3 or 4 different times. And so these things drive costs for us and they make our customers really upset. So reducing effort becomes one of the best possible ways for us to drive these business outcomes we care about. Now, at Tethr, moving one click further here on the left side of this page, what Tethr has done is build a predictive measure to identify in every single interaction what are the sources of that effort and what would the customer have said about how difficult or how easy that interaction was. Many of you might use a survey question called the customer effort score. That actually measure that was invented out of this book and out of that research. We've built a measure to predict the customer's response to that. Every Tethr interaction gets a score on a 0 to 10 basis that predicts that effort. So we're predicting on every interaction the types of things that customers care about that matter most with respect to our business outcomes. Now, as you move all the way over to the left-hand side, what the agent impact score does is we isolate those specific factors that are in the control of the agent. Now, imagine there's lots of sources of effort and lots of sources of friction that may not be the agent's fault. The website's broken. It's not the agent's fault. We don't want to hold the agent responsible for those situations. We do want to hold the agent responsible for handling those difficult situations. And you will see big differences in how some agents handle those things versus others. And that's what the agent impact score zeroes in on. That's what it goes to, those very specific things that our agents are doing as a way to drive great experiences for our customers. Now, the great part about this is that it's connected directly to those outcomes we care about. So now we have a way of measuring on a day-to-day basis, interaction by interaction basis, how our agents are going about managing quality that our customers care about, right? The things that drive great experiences for them, that reduce friction and effort on their part, and make it easy to do business with you as an organization. So the agent impact score, you can see it's an algorithm we've built. It is a derivative of that Tethr effort index, and it's got more than 250 different independent variables that we're measuring across the interaction. Things with respect to customer issues that they might they might have to deal with. So their customer's frustrated. What's the language and the words that the agent is going to use in those situations? We then also pair that with a series of audio features that we extract around things like overtalk, interruption, silence time, and so forth, which are measures that indicate things like the active nature of that conversation. And then we developed a score on a 0 to 10 basis so that our customers every single day get a sense for how is this trending and what's happening over time. So a great way for our customers to be able to do kind of 3 very discrete things. So they've got these scores on a 0 to 10 basis. What do they do with them? Well, the first thing they do at the top of the page is they shine a light on exemplary behavior, right? They can use these top scores as a way to understand from the customer's point of view, who are our best? What are the things that are driving high quality interactions with their customers? Let's look at those scores between, call it 7 and 10, and shine a light on those exemplary behaviors. Second, in the middle of the page, we're going to help our average performers spot those missed opportunities. Now, we all know there's a huge swath of service interactions every single day that are kind of neither great nor terrible, right? Customers got a very simple issue, agent responds, they resolve the issue, and they get off the phone. In fact, we encourage that to reduce handle times and make sure that we're managing things efficiently. Well, what if that in those situations there was an opportunity for that agent to spot that downstream issue that the customers they know is going to experience later that's going to cause a call later? We want our agents spotting those things. And so we're going to help them spot those missed opportunities. Yes, that was a 5 and that's fine. That's not terrible. But it could have been a 7 or 8 had you done this. That's the power of an algorithm like this. And then finally, of course, maybe most powerful towards the bottom is we're going to flag poor scores that are going to mitigate those ongoing, really big situations that drive churn for our customers and really drive underperformance for our agents. And so we can sort of literally automate the notion of anytime a score is of 0 or 1 or 2, those are really bad situations. I want my supervisors knowing every time that happens, because this is indicative of an agent who took maybe a bad situation and made it far worse by how they handled it. So just a really powerful way. And let me give you kind of 3 examples of kind of what our customers are doing as a way to measure quality assurance and using the agent impact score. Here I've got an example of a hospitality company. You can see on the left-hand side, in the past, they might have used a scorecard that was rather subjective in nature, but still got after big things they care about. So was the agent positive and enthusiastic? Were they polite and respectful? Did they demonstrate ownership and confidence? Yes, no, and so forth. And they're looking at samplings of different recordings. Now, contrast that with on the right-hand side, where now they're using Tethr and they're measuring this on an everyday basis. And they have a sense for not just the percentage of calls that Sue was below average with respect to the agent impact score, but how that breaks down into individual language patterns, contextualizing it against other agents, and then also understanding the trend lines and how things are changing over time. So just a really powerful way to put that customer right on their QA scorecard, right? The customer themselves is got their hand up and saying, hey, you might have thought that agent was very polite, but the outcome for me wasn't all that great, didn't feel all that great. And so this allows us to be able to put that right on that scorecard. Next example, so here there's a retail company that's powering coaching opportunities using that agent impact score. So let's contrast before and after. So before the agent impact score on the left-hand side, they would have their QA managers listen to different calls, and they would ask, or maybe even use a post interaction survey. Did the agent fully resolve that issue? So let's assume for a moment they did that. They get the survey back. It wasn't a great score, so they go and they look at that call, and the QA manager says, "Hey, you know what? I looked at this call. I can see, empathy was something that was really missing. So let's go and work on that." And the agent responds by something like, well, that's just the one call you happen to listen to. I'm usually really empathetic, right? You just listen to the wrong call. And that just never clicks with Greg as to why he should care about changing behavior. So nothing does change. Now contrast that with the right-hand side. So here, I not only have on every interaction the Tethr effort index, but I got the agent impact score. So I know what percentage of that bad experience was responsible to the agent. And so then they can look across all these different behaviors and across agents and say, hey, your empathy, you do actually exhibit a fair amount of empathy. The problem is you also exhibit a fair amount of confusion in those situations. And so it's drowning out those situations. So I know you think that you're great on empathy, but as it comes across to the customer, it's not really that effective because you're also confused at the same time. And so let's work on these things in context of one another. And so Greg can really see what might be happening. He gets why the customers might feel that way, and he's made that connection and more likely to change behavior. Last example, so this one is a good one because it's really pretty obvious, right? It's an insurance company. They're looking to use agent impact score for onboarding and training purposes. And you can see on the left-hand side, this is something that a lot of us kind of struggle with, right? The QA manager is of course going to go back to that old trusty let's role play, right? It's the tried and true method of role playing different behaviors, and Greg thinks what we all think, which is these things. This doesn't ever actually feel like the real thing. So just he goes through the motions, right? Using Tethr as I look towards the middle of the page, now I can look for specific examples in situations where both the behavior was demonstrated and the scores were both good and bad. And so I can contrast situations where they did it, but sometimes it came across and was received better than others. And that contrast, those examples become really powerful. And it makes, as you see on the right-hand side of the page, makes the behavior feel really real, right? I can increase their absorption and their understanding of just how different it is to do this in a way that the customer feels good about it. And so he gets how I can combine advocacy with other techniques at the right point in the conversation in the given context. And so again, he's not going through the motions. It becomes very real, very specific, and very pointed. So Greg can go about adopting that in his language patterns as he moves forward in conversation. So let me stop there for a moment, and Pete, I'll bring you back into the conversation. I know I went through a whole bunch of slides in a short period of time, but that's how we see our customers go about measuring quality assurance on a day-to-day basis. And of course, it's really important in this environment where every single day they're sort of out, often still distributed at home, having to deal with their kids in remote learning situations. I know I have kids just upstairs right now doing band, and it is a new normal, and so it's ever more important to be able to take that audio, extract really meaningful insight from it, and help our agents every single day as they navigate these new waters.
Okay, thank you both. Very interesting and insightful presentation. I think certainly absolutely critical to understand the customer effort score. I mean, it's one of the main themes that's run all the way through this this event. Customer experience is predicated on creating effortless and frictionless interaction for customers and fulfillment. How far off do you think we are from persona matching between customers and employees, and what value would that or could that deliver?
So I'm happy to start there. I don't know, Pete, if you have a point of view. So there's definitely a couple of companies out there that are pretty well known for persona matching, and I think in situations in particular when it feels like it's driving the types of things we'd want to do and reinforce from an agent performance management and coaching perspective, it's certainly worth experimenting with. We haven't seen lots of evidence that it makes a huge difference to the customer. And look, we're research driven, and we'll continue to examine that. And where we see situations when there's evidence that customers seem to really attach to certain personas from customers, then of course that's something we'd look to examine further. But it does make logical sense in a sense, right, where you can look to just identify with certain individuals. I will tell you, there's an article that my boss Matt Dixon wrote in the Harvard Business Review about some tactics that T-Mobile was using a couple years ago, and it wasn't persona based, but they did have some success in getting their agents to know their customers better. So they created these pods that allowed them to route calls to very specific teams that knew people by city. And so while not persona based, that does present evidence that there is an element of knowing your audience, knowing your customers, and identifying with them that does drive a little bit of success.
Okay, no, interesting. And Pete, you mentioned about a service that you guys are providing to reanalyze data and extract it from other recorders. I think that's quite an interesting first step to be able to start to understand the value that sits in data. What would you say you've learned from it, and how could if people wanted to take that forward, how could we progress it?
We started doing it probably about a year ago now, and really to accelerate, because analyzing voice conversations has been going on for quite some time, but it's really accelerated over the last year, and more so over the last 6 months, probably because of the current situation. And for us, it's really enabled customers to move a lot faster, rather than worry about historically voice recordings and that whole architecture, which has never really been driven in a way to support voice analytics. So it's allowed us to really accelerate the progress of a lot of our customers' projects, especially enterprise level customers, and get them moving a lot quicker. And we support that by just saying, look, leave your current infrastructure in the way it is today. Let's just put something purely in for doing the voice analytics because you've got a specific business outcome you want to drive, whether it's at the agent side or the customer side. So it's speed to market that's helped for us and our customers.
And I guess it's a great opportunity where people are taking a step back and looking at the customer engagement and maybe redesigning journeys and customer experience to use that as a metric for voice of the customer to actually understand these interactions and have data and insight behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to go this way. You cannot, as Ted said, you cannot physically analyze every call manually. We all know that. So
yeah.
It doesn't matter which area of the market you're operating in.
Okay, no, brilliant. Do we have any, I mean, I've asked a few questions there, right? But have we got any questions anyone wants to ask? If so, please do pop them on the chat. I think it's a fascinating topic. And again, I think, when you start looking at integrating into CRM and having a much bigger view of the customer across all interactions now, it gives you that 360 view of the customers and how you service them.
It does, especially from a CRM perspective. It moves away from having a flat record of information about customers. You've got some real context and insight rather than something that's quite emotive and flat. Very interesting.
And I guess the thing is that it's not a stretch beyond the imagination there, where people are looking at automated handling and processes and workflows now with this data to be able to start to route, start to respond, and interact accordingly based upon understanding preferences, behavior that you're now able to pull together across the CRM.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think we've got any questions. That does bring us up to time on the session anyway. So, gentlemen, really interesting. Really appreciate your involvement, your insights. People want to know more, let us know. Go and visit the booth. I think they'll be open for a few minutes more. If you've got further questions, put them in the chat, and we'll happily come back to you after this event. And of course, if you want to know more, let us know. We've been partners with Redbox for many years now, and some really exciting technology that I think can really help to deliver the next dimension in customer experience. So, thank you very much, both. That just leaves me now with the task of closing the event. So, I'd like to thank everyone that has attended. I hope you've found it very enjoyable. I know there's been a lot of content and insight provided over the 3 days. It was certainly mission impossible for the team, converting a physical event to a virtual event and fully digital event. So it's been fun. It's not been without challenges. It's demonstrated it's been a live, real event. So I really like to thank all of the presenters and contributors and partners for their efforts, their insights, their contribution. I'd like to thank everyone who's attended and helped to make it a good interactive event. And of course, I'd like to thank my colleagues and team at Britannic for really rising to the challenge and putting on something that was quite groundbreaking and in not a lot of time. So I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be making the videos available, and we'd love to have follow-on conversations. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day, and hope to catch you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.